Why don't we find some people in the audience who want to share my fun and ask him some questions. Dick.
You broke the story in a BlackBerry. How?
Mm-hmm.
You broke the story in a book. I can talk. You broke the story in a BlackBerry. Mm-hmm. How did you get words and pictures out of that place for the next 72 hours or whatever?
It was really difficult. I mean, in an optimal situation, we would have had the type of satellite phone you call a BGAN. I was actually holding my computer when the quake hit, and continued holding it through the quake, and realized after the earthquake had stopped that I still had my computer in my hand, and then didn't let it go. I ran out the house with it, and I think I was still holding it. I was definitely when I made the call in. Optimally, if our BGANs had been easily locatable and up and running, that's how we would have sent it out. And that's how the little bit of information that did get out got out. I mean, the one thing about Haiti that prepared us in a way, I mean, nobody was prepared for this earthquake, but it prepared us in a way to be able to work afterward, is that electricity is never a sure thing. You know, running water is never a sure thing, and never anything that you want to drink. I mean, there were certain rhythms of life that we were used to that apply as well in day-to-day life, in the natural disaster that is day-to-day life amid extreme poverty and lack of infrastructure, as I guess that's not natural, but disaster, as in an earthquake. In our particular case, the night of January 12th, 2010 was spent entirely looking for means of communication. I was able to dictate the first part of the story on that BlackBerry. I then, because of Evans, I would have never gone back in that place, but he went in and then got me to go back into what was left of the house and go through stuff and find what we could to take back out. I had my 2 local cell phones, which still had a little bit of charge in them. The networks were down, but I kept plugging on them. I was doing what they call war biking. I had my laptop open on my lap as we were in his car moving through the city looking for an internet signal anywhere that one would pop up. As it turns out, actually, a hotel that had stood, because it's made entirely of wood, we, not thinking, thought that it must surely have collapsed in the earthquake, but actually had weathered it quite well, because walking up the staircase at this place, you feel like it's going to fall down, so we figured 7.0 earthquake under the city would have taken care of it, but it's still there today. It's lovely. It's called the Hotel Olafson. And actually, a lot of the first pictures that came out of there, because they had a working generator and they got some kind of working internet connection. I don't actually know what they used. And they were able to, and so a couple of, Daniel Morel, whose pictures ended up appearing on Agence France Presse, which is now the subject of a lawsuit. But those were some of the first pictures that came out. He put those on Twitter via TwitPic. Tequila Minsky, who was a photographer, I think she sent her photos to the New York Times over that same connection. That's where a lot of it got out. I was able a couple of times to get through on my cell phones, dictate what was going on around us, and then ultimately we ended up at the U.S. Embassy, which was built to withstand anything and did withstand this. It's a new embassy. And I was able to actually call my folks from there. I think I talked to my editors from there. The embassy actually wouldn't let us in to the embassy. What can you do? So essentially, your question is the exact question that I had as soon as the earthquake stopped, was basically like, how am I going to communicate this? And that's all I could think of. And that was the story of that night, was survival, but comms, like getting around and trying to find a way to communicate. After that point, AP loaded up a couple of planes, which flew down from Miami people were landing at the airport, people were landing in Santo Domingo and coming over land, and they brought toys that I didn't even know existed and would have loved to have known existed at the time of the earthquake. And so from that point on, it was, to tell you the honest truth, filing after the earthquake, just doing like the day-to-day of my job, go out, report, come back, write up the story, send out the story, answer questions about, go to sleep, was easier after the earthquake than it had been at any point in my career in Haiti up to that point.
So a couple more, yes.
So how obviously the earthquake hits, it's a big earthquake, this is a huge story.
Yeah. But
how long did it take you to really understand the scope of it, and was there something that you saw that made you go, oh my God?
Well, clearly what had happened to our house was the first indication that this had not gone well. Knowing, speaking for Evans as well, knowing what we knew about Haiti, like I said, a couple days of heavy rain, not a problem somewhere else. It's a couple days of heavy rain, but in Haiti, it's a flood, houses getting washed out, landslides. Things are magnified by, initially by the poverty. I mean, that's what we knew coming in. A school had collapsed behind my house in 2008. 100 people died. And it's still not entirely clear what caused that collapse. But I can tell you from having been at the site, it was what the president of Haiti called anarchic construction. There was no permit, there was not enough rebar. It was built on the side of a hill. It was sort of a predatory school that existed basically to take money from parents who desperately want to educate their kids, but because there's no state, there aren't good options, there aren't good public schools to do it, and there aren't enough. And so this thing had just been built up, and they threw a third story on it because they figured more kids, more tuition. They were having a class party. The whole thing came down, 100 people died. That had happened a year and a half before, without an earthquake, or at the very least without a major earthquake. I don't know if maybe somebody's going to go back someday and find that there had been a tremor. The shaking that we had, the collapse of my house, which was a good house, it was a house that when you were in a hurricane, great place to be because nothing was going to happen to that house. It wasn't going to fall down. The fact that it had just fallen down, in large part, was a fairly good indication that there was trouble. Serious trouble. And when we came out of the house we ran around and Evans, we were standing there and we were looking at the house, and Evans pointed up to the neighborhood that had been behind us, an area called Neret, and it was gone. There was a cloud of dust all around us. Actually, seeing pictures later and from our own coughing, I realized that we were actually in the cloud, but when you're in it, you can only see the edges, which I guess is a good metaphor for something I'll think of later to put in the book. It was gone. The buildings that had been there a minute before or 2 minutes before were not there anymore. And there were thousands and thousands of people screaming everywhere. So at the very least, I could say with a degree of repertorial, according to the Associated Press, certainty that at the very least, at the immediate area where we were, something very bad had happened. And from the amount of shaking, it was fairly obvious that anywhere close to us, and we were in Pétionville, which is just up from Port-au-Prince. It's basically a suburb of Port-au-Prince, but very much part of the Port-au-Prince metropolitan area. Anything near us, there was no way to know. Maybe we were the epicenter, maybe it wasn't so bad in other places, but at the very least, we were screwed. Anything right close to it was screwed, and probably things close to that and close to that and close to that. And so that was a fairly good indication. Now, it's true, though, in those initial reports, and that's actually the first conversation that I had with the editor on the desk was, she kept asking, she was like, "Are you sure it's bad?" It's like, "There's been an earthquake in Port-au-Prince. Are you sure it's a bad earthquake?" "Yeah." "Bad earthquake. Are you sure? Do you know?" And then we had to, they were asking questions. We had to find details. And so the very, very first thing was Pierre Richard, who was the guy with the camera. He'd actually been at the house/office a little bit before and had just left. And he was walking up to the street, I think to grab, a moto home. He was standing at the top of our hill where the Dominican embassy and there was a large building that had formerly been a hospital was standing. And at this point, it had converted mostly to doctor's offices, some hospital functions. It still had the hospital sign on it. It still was part of that hospital. It also had some apartments in it. And he was standing on the street when the shaking hit, and he watched the entire building come down, along with all the other buildings around it. And he came running down the hill, and right at the moment that the editor, Danica Kokoto, asked me, are you sure that this is bad? One of the iterations of that question, Pierre was running down, and I was like, wait, Pierre, what did you see? And he told me that he had seen this. And so if you actually go back to the initial news alert filed by AP, I think it was a strong earthquake has hit Haiti's capital where a hospital has collapsed. So the first thing that they were doing was looking for some proof that this was bad. Obviously that was a tragedy in and of itself, but it was part of a much larger tragedy.
Now, did you have a network at all, like from the provinces, reports in from elsewhere?
Yeah.
Okay, so and so that
Well,
also.
but that's generally speaking. After the earthquake, because of the problems with communications, we weren't getting much from other places. I would say that in terms of immediately after the earthquake, figuring out how bad the devastation was in other places, a lot of that came the same way that the news came to everybody in Port-au-Prince, which was by word of mouth.
Yeah. Okay.
But word of mouth is very powerful in Haiti and a very useful source of information.
Good. I'm told that we're short on time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take one last question in the back. Maybe two more quick ones. Let's do it that way.
Hi, Jonathan. I am wondering, I'm not a fan of journalists being self-indulgent, and I don't think you are either, but I'm wondering about the emotional impact of covering this on you, if you experienced any trauma, or if you felt like you had to get some rest after.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I took a week off, about 3 weeks after the earthquake, and AP, to its credit, was insistent that I do so, not necessarily because of any symptoms of mental distress that I was showing up to that point that I know of, but just on general principle. Yeah, I mean it's a definite affecting experience, and that's a whole other conversation, but it's a very important one. I think that the world of journalism is, along with the military and other parts of our society, are coming around more to an acceptance of being able to talk about things like post-traumatic stress disorder. And there was I think, philosophy, I don't know if you would even call it that, but there was an attitude in journalism for a long time that was sort of like, oh, you just drink your way out of it, don't talk about it, you'll be fine. Or, you get the shake, yeah, we all have the shakes too, you'll be all right. And it was something that by the time this earthquake happened at the beginning of 2010 was already being taken seriously and at least talked about. I think we need to, as an industry, go from just talking about it seriously to really addressing it, because we're not quite there yet. We know it's important, we know you're supposed to do something, we're not quite sure what it is, but you have a deadline in like an hour, and it would be really great if we could talk about this after the interview. And we're not quite at the point yet, but yeah, I mean, for me, I would say that, no pun intended, it obviously shook me up quite a bit. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I take seriously and that I deal with and I don't take lightly, but yeah, I mean, I can go into more detail in another forum, but maybe more of these.
So one last question. No hands? Someone? Yes.
This might be not a good, oh, this is really loud. But I was just curious, I know that after all the reports came out of Haiti, there was some thought by members of the Haitian community, I think like Jonathan Katz wrote a piece about how they were concerned that because this was really the only narrative that the American people knew of Haiti, that it was kind of creating this sort of like heart of darkness concept of this country, you know, with the fact of the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere that was repeated over and over again. So my question is like, especially in crisis reporting from a country like Haiti, how do you adequately convey like the severity of the situation without kind of only identifying a country by its problems, I guess, especially in a news situation like AP?
Yeah, no, that's a terrific question. And that's a huge, you know, even that one phrase that you brought up, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. You go and do a Google search with my name, you'll find it in plenty of my stories. I mean, we would put it in there. You know, but the appearance of that phrase also for some people, I stopped using it, not necessarily because it was strictly inaccurate. I mean, in terms of per capita GDP, it is, and even though there are other ways of measuring wealth and value, taking the word poverty as an indicator of economic status, it's useful to explain that Haiti is much poorer than other countries around it, including the other country on its own island, which has poverty issues of its own, but nothing that compare to Haiti's. But I stopped using it because it ended up being it was basically a thought-stopping cliche. Because you'd put that line in the story, somebody reads it, and for a lot of people, it's just like, all right, it's one of those stories. I'm not going to read anymore. And it's not worth it. It's not so informative, and it's not such a mellifluous string of words that you can't explain that in other ways. I do think that if you're reporting from a place like Haiti, or let's just talk about Haiti specifically, you would do a tremendous disservice to discuss Haiti while glossing over problems or bending over backwards to find a positive spin to put on every problem. It's like, well, there's a malnutrition crisis in the country, but that's okay because there's also amazing artwork. No. I mean, there is amazing artwork. It's incredible, but it has nothing to do with malnutrition. And as a reporter, you're committing malpractice to go and be in a place that is dealing with these issues and pretend like they don't exist just because they can put the country in a negative light. And by the way, I think that Jonathan Katz would be one of the first people to agree with that statement. And she's never shied away in any of her writing from dealing with the real problems. But one thing that she does and that she can do as a writer of her style that I think is instructive for journalists as well is the danger that you get into is when you essentialize and you generalize. And even though, even here, I keep saying Haitians do this, Haiti is like this, and to a certain extent, you can't get away from it because you are trying to talk about things on this national, larger scale. But when if you're telling true stories, and they're really the stories about people. By default, if you're being honest and you're being accurate and you're being complete, you're going to avoid that sort of propagation of the heart of darkness mystique because you're shining a light. I mean, you're showing something as it is, and individual people's stories are all different from one another. And if over the course of your career or your time in Haiti, you're able to tell enough of those stories to sort of show the kaleidoscope as it is, and show that not all experiences are the same, and show that living in a tent camp is not an exercise in sitting around and crying yourself to sleep every night. Or it is, but there are other parts to your life. Or not everybody lives in a tent camp, because they don't. Not everybody lives in Port-au-Prince. There's a lot of other experiences lived in Haiti, right? And I think that the way to get around that is to be accurate, to be honest, to be fair, but to just try to tell the widest variety of stories possible, and to really dig into all those individual stories. And that way you avoid the situation where you come down, and this often happens just by necessity and deadlines and the attention span of the people you're going to talk to. But you set up the camera, you turn it on, you show Desolation, you stand in front of it, and you say, "This is Desolation, I'm in Haiti, Jonathan Katz, thank you." And that's it. That ends up creating a mythos that becomes impenetrable because nobody can look into it to see that there are actual people there. That's how I avoid it, I hope.
So I want to close, thank you. I want to close by asking a two-pointer. When you sat back there in my class,
Yes.
And maybe you had other classes in here, but did you ever think you'd be up here for something like this?
Well, eventually class ends and you can just come up.
And the second part of that is for the students out here, what do you want to say to them?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have any.
Come on.
I don't have any amazing
No, I don't want
poetic advice.
bromides. I want just, and maybe not to be you, but I mean, you worked at the Daily and you saw people yes and no. So how do we get to yes for these guys? What do journalism students need to know and do to be successful?
I think the main thing, I really think this, is to go into every story not assuming that you know. The point of doing this is it's news, right? People who, we are conveying unknown information to an audience who doesn't know the information. And you are coming in and you are essentially the vanguard of that audience who's coming in and trying to get it first, right? There are things that you know, there's context that you have, there are things that you know to ask. But when you go to a new country, don't assume. And when you start reporting a new story in that country, don't assume. It may look a lot like things that you've covered before, but if it's worth actually doing a news story on, then there's going to be something new. And if it's new, it means you don't know it yet. And I think that a lot of the problems that we run into, like the ones that you brought up with sort of propagating old narratives, the way you propagate a narrative is you come with a narrative in your head, and you start looking for things that fit that narrative. And you discard things that don't fit the narrative because then you're not delivering the product that your editor wanted or your producer wanted or that you think that the audience wants. Go in not knowing, try to figure it out, try to find the most interesting things, put it together, and then over the course of that one story and all those stories and then your career, you start being able to put some pieces together, and you start being able to identify your own stories better. Then, well, maybe this is a hole in my understanding that needs to be filled, and then you can also fill the audience's gap in their understanding. And then ultimately you run to something else that blows up everything that you thought you knew up to that point. Right. But that's really what it is. It's just, look, if you're going to be in this job, you have to have an ego, because you have to be willing to walk up to Bill Clinton and be like, "Yo, Bill, seriously, dude. Seriously," right?
And he does.
Yeah.
No, I not have an ego, but we'll ask those questions.
Right. Well, both.
Yeah.
But the ego should be in the service of a humble goal.
Exactly. Okay. That is great. Thank you very much, Jonathan.